Our Around the World segment tonight, tensions are high after the U.S. Navy shot down a Syrian fighter jet this weekend. According to reports, Syria was the instigator, bombing coalition-backed rebel forces despite attempts at de-escalation by the U.S. But following the incident, Russia now says they'll treat U.S. planes over Syria as targets. Watch.
A U.S. Hornet warplane shooting a Syrian fighter jet out of the sky on Sunday. Washington says it was acting in self-defense and that the Syrian plane had dropped bombs near U.S.-backed forces, while Damascus says it was downed while flying a mission against Islamic State militants. It's the first time a Syrian jet has been hit by the U.S. since the start of the conflict in 2011. The Syrian army is calling it an attempt to undermine its efforts as the only effective force in fighting terrorism across the country. The U.S.-led coalition has been aggressively ramping up its aerial bombing campaign in Syria, recently capturing several districts near Raqqa from militants.
Joining me now from the Washington Free Beacon, Adam Kredo. Adam, good to see you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, Adam, first of all, I thought President Trump was supposed to be a puppet of Vladimir Putin. This seems like an awfully odd thing for the military of a puppet of Putin to be doing.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It certainly shows that Trump is willing to confront Russia, but honestly, I think that's something we all knew to begin with, despite the Democrats harping on collusion, obstruction, all of these types of nonsense things that are taking place in D.C. But I think it's very interesting and important to highlight who Russia is working with. So it's not just the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, it's also Iran, which is playing a major role in bolstering Assad, and it's also Hezbollah, Iran's terror proxy group. This is the alignment that the U.S. is combating or going up against in Syria, and I think it's very important to show this proxy war is taking place.
Right, and that it's also important to make sure that we say that's who Russia is siding with too. It's not just who the United States is fighting, it's who Russia is siding with. They're giving arms, they're defending, they're threatening on behalf of these people. But Adam, tell me, why did this happen? The U.S. had to know that this would escalate tensions, clearly. I mean, shooting down a Syrian warplane, a fighter jet, that's no small decision. Why did they do it?
No, it's certainly not, but it's also very reactive. A week and a half ago, we saw an Iranian drone in Syria that was also being used by Hezbollah forces target U.S. coalition forces. That's U.S. personnel and others on the ground in Syria. So I would think it's fair to say this attack and this type of aggressive posture was not started by the Trump administration or the U.S., but rather started by Iran, which has been quite clear that they're going to amp up the proxy war. That has launched direct strikes on the U.S., and that is very surprising and also very new. At the same time Iran's been doing this, Hezbollah very publicly released a statement that said, we're going to target U.S. forces. So look, I think we have to see this for what it is. This is Iran and Hezbollah, and to some extent, Russia directly targeting the U.S. They're asking for this war, and I think CENTCOM, I've spoken to multiple military officials there, the U.S. military is no longer willing to put up with it. They're not going to be setting targets for Syria, Iran, and Russia.
Right, and I mean, that does justify, in a sense, the worry that this would escalate or that the U.S. would become a target. But if we're talking about this proxy war, why is Iran picking to escalate this proxy war, I guess, in Syria? Is it just because it's the closest, the most easily accessible U.S. personnel, U.S. troops, U.S. military are? Why Syria?
Well, look, I think that that's certainly one of the reasons. Look, the Iranians have had personnel and troops and certainly Hezbollah there for quite a long time. So the infrastructure militarily is in place, but it's also to send a message. Iran has been for quite some time very big into in the Persian Gulf. You know, we see harassment of U.S. boats, and certainly in Syria, exerting their influence and flexing their muscle and really saying to the U.S. that we're going to confront you. I saw a videotape that was released by the Iranians of a drone, and it was shadowing U.S. forces in Syria. And over top of it, you could hear narration in Farsi by the Iranians that they were laughing and saying the U.S. doesn't even know we're shadowing them and we could strike them at any time. And I think if the Iranians keep up this behavior, they're going to get a very rude awakening call from the Trump administration, not just in Syria, but also in the Persian Gulf and elsewhere in the region where Iran is really trying to show that it has power and influence. And I think they have more than they actually do. It's just a matter of time as far as I can tell.
Right, and it's no wonder, I guess, that they think they can get away with this after the way that the Obama administration didn't hold them accountable for anything, the way the United Nations continues not to hold them accountable for anything, even things that violate international law. Adam, last question. When we're talking about the safety and security of American troops in Syria, as a result of the United States shooting down the Syrian fighter plane, the communications channel between Russia and the United States to make sure that neither of their warplanes interfered with each other, that's been closed down. Is that going to put the U.S. in more danger?
I think it certainly adds a level of danger to what's going on there, and I would blame the Russians for that. Look, we could all create a safer environment, a less violent environment, which is relatively speaking in Syria, where the violence is just frightening and horrible. But that's certainly Russia's fault for trying to lessen the amount of safety we could have. And I would also note here, not just with the Russians, what the Iranians have been doing is using ballistic missiles. And that, of course, comes back to a whole wider regional dispute over Iran's use of weaponry that is actually prohibited under international law. So between the Russians and the Iranians, I only see the danger for U.S. forces increasing there.
Which is a shame to see. Adam, I appreciate you coming on the show, breaking this down for us. It was good to talk to you.